Good afternoon, everyone. We're, we're all gathered here today to discuss the past, present, and the future role that Nepal's production landscapes play in operationalizing green, resilient, and inclusive development. At the nexus of water, agriculture, and forest, and to address climate and other environmental risks, as well as enhancing the inclusion of indigenous people, local communities, and women in the rural economy. May I please welcome you all to this event. First, I would like to welcome His Excellency, the Ambassador for Nepal to the United States, Mr. Sridhar Khatri, the Finance Secretary of Nepal, Mr. Toyam Raya, the Executive Director of United States, Mr. Adriana Kugler, Miss Adriana Kugler, the World Bank Country Director for Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, Mr. Faris Haddad Zervos, the delegation of the Government of Nepal, development partners, members of the civil society organizations, and distinguished guests. We are all gathered here today to engage in a leaders' dialogue with the new government of Nepal, Nepali NGOs, development partners, and the World Bank on operationalizing Nepal's grid vision in the rural landscape to secure livelihoods, public goods from sustainably managed production landscapes. By the end of the event, we hope to identify key lessons from Nepal's experience in community forest management and secure interest and support for Nepal's rural transformation by convening decision makers involved in climate finance, IDA, as well as bilateral and other financing. May I please now welcome His Excellency Mr. Sridhar Khatri, Nepal's ambassador to the United States, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Ms. Adriana Kugler, World Bank Executive Director for the United States, Mr. Faris Haddad Zervos, World Bank Country Director for Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, officials from the Government of Nepal, and representatives of Nepali civil society, and distinguished participants. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be part of this important event organized by the World Bank to support Nepal's initiatives on green, resilient, and inclusive development grid in the forest landscape. I would like to thank the World Bank for this initiative and its continued interest and support in Nepal's development efforts. At the outset, I'm happy to mention that Nepal is one of the few countries which has formally adopted the Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development Framework as its national development vision. The landmark declaration endorsed by the Government of Nepal and 70 development partners, known as the Kathmandu Declaration on Grid on 23rd September 2021, constitutes an important part of Nepal's strategic action plan in this direction. After the declaration, 2 national budgets, several new policies, and an ongoing preparation of the Grid Strategic Action Plan by the Ministry of Finance all point to the sustained commitment of the Government of Nepal to operationalize the grid framework. The formulation of the 16th periodic plan for Nepal is on the doorstep, and I hope it will reflect Nepal's emerging priority of green transitions. To operationalize grid in Nepal, there is a need to build on Nepali successes such as community forest management, which led to an expansion of forest cover now reaching above 45% of the land area. Second, biodiversity conservation, which has protected charismatic mammals, and supported nature-based tourism. Three, reconstruction from the 2015 earthquake. And four, COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which has reached over 80% of the population, many of whom are isolated. All of these accomplishments required engaging with citizens in a transparent and effective manner. Nepal's successes with community forest management shows that effective development hinges upon effective social inclusion. This means indigenous people and local communities, with the support of the government and partners, are essential for rural development. Talking about these success stories, it is important to keep in mind that it would be a Herculean task for countries like Nepal to achieve the grid objectives by leapfrogging from the conventional exploitative and extractive economic growth models adopted by the industrialized countries and developed countries over centuries. Countries like Nepal, which are at the receiving end of the adverse effects of climate change, despite having negligible contribution in the global carbon emission, lack additional resources and advanced technologies needed for transition to the grid pathway. While Nepal's recent historical transformation into a federal democratic and inclusive governance system provides conducive political environment to adopt grid approach, in terms of mobilizing resources and technology to implement the model, Nepal needs enhanced support and cooperation from its international development partners. Forest landscapes are essential for Nepal's economy to, one, generate livelihoods and jobs from timber and non-timber products. Two, secure climate resilience by regulating water variability, quality, and quantity needed for irrigation. Hydropower, drinking water supply, and disaster risk reduction. And three, protect important habitats and develop nature-based tourism. However, due to the larger macroeconomic reasons, major population shifts are taking place in the rural areas of Nepal. Younger generation is migrating to the urban and lowland areas, as well as to other countries for better economic opportunities. As a result, while population pressure on forests is easing, at the same time, the traditional reliance for livelihood on local forests is diminishing significantly. In order to link the forest landscape to the socio-economic development of the country, we need to think innovatively in order to find ways to tap the forest resources by involving the private sector, particularly the micro and small and medium enterprises. I would like to encourage the participants in today's program to look for ways to help Nepal by means of sharing the best practices of the private sector involvement in the forest resource utilization, capacity building for vertical and horizontal coordination in the federal setup, as well as other policy and regulatory advice. The World Bank has been long-standing development partner for Nepal and has been working closely with Nepal development partners to align and upscale financial and non-financial support for Nepal's grid priorities. The focus of today's event will provide an excellent opportunity to identify the forward-looking direction to support green, resilient, and inclusive rural transformation in Nepal to help secure livelihoods for all. Last night, during dinner, I had an excellent opportunity to learn a lot about grid from Steve Danio. And I'm really hoping that after listening to you today, I'll learn more about it in the future. And I look forward to interacting with Steve in the future also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome our Executive Director for Nepal, Mr. Wempi Saputra, who's joined us. Now, may I please welcome Ms. Adriana Kugler for her opening remarks.
Thank you so much. You can also call me Dr. Kugler. That works well, and it's gender neutral, so that works. But there are only 6 women in the board of directors of the bank. So it is important for people to know that we're here, that women are here at the board. They're represented as the top leadership. So good afternoon, everybody. So you already know I'm the executive director at the World Bank. I work indeed very closely with my colleague Wempi Saputra, who represents Nepal at the board and represents it very well. I am thrilled to be here, and I am very grateful for the organizers of this event. I think indeed it is a very important event, a very important conversation to be had, and I am really honored to be joined by an illustrious group of speakers and participants this afternoon. The U.S. recognizes that Nepal is facing multiple interlinked development challenges, including climate change. As the World Bank's CCDR, we're experts here on acronyms, as you well know. The CCDR stands for Country Climate and Development Report. The Nepal CCDR came out very early, and it makes very clear that climate change poses a major threat to Nepal's poverty reduction and development efforts. So these CCDRs have been very valuable because they really show the linkage between global public bads, in this case, like climate change, and development and the twin goals, and poverty and shared prosperity. So in this case, I think it is very clear in the CCDR that climate change is generating more flooding and heat stress in Nepal, damaging Nepal's nature, including its forests. It is also really causing a deterioration in people's health and livelihood, so it affects development directly. Women and indigenous people are particularly vulnerable groups that are disproportionately affected by these global public bads. So we really applaud the Nepali authorities for your dedication, for your focus on economic development, and the proactive steps that you are taking to address the vulnerabilities of Nepal, and most importantly, of the people of Nepal. As will be discussed during this event over the next couple of hours, this green, resilient, and inclusive development approach, or the GREAT approach, again, we love our acronyms here, provides a long-term vision for sustainability, for sustainable growth, and for building resilience against a range of shocks, including climate. And this is really important. The inclusive part is also really critical in the GREAT approach, because we think that as we build sustainable growth and build resilience, it is very important to engage in this work with NGOs and development partners in the country. So we're very glad to have seen this development definitely in Nepal. Indeed, despite the impacts of climate change through its innovative community forest management approach, which the ambassador referenced, Nepal has been able to expand its forest cover significantly over the past 3 decades. This is vitally important for the country, as forests underpin the livelihoods of many rural families, as you mentioned, Ambassador. I am glad to see that representatives from Nepal's community forest groups are present here today. I think you play a critical role, and I hope you will continue to play a critical role. And I also want to recognize the important work that the Climate Investment Fund's Forest Investment Program has played. Indeed, the U.S. is a strong supporter of the climate investment funds, and we will continue to support your efforts. Looking forward, it will be really important for partners to help address Nepal's development challenges in this holistic way. Once again, I think we need to focus on climate, on biodiversity, but we also need to focus on how it affects communities and lifts up communities. Through the World Bank's evolution process, we anticipate that, in fact, the World Bank will be even better equipped moving forward to help countries such as Nepal address these frequent and more complex global challenges that we're seeing. Let me just conclude by saying that I am very confident that Nepal can continue to make significant progress together with the World Bank, together with the NGOs and community groups, and together with other development partners. We talk a lot about partnerships as we talk about our evolution work here at the bank, so that we can continue to make progress. I wish you really productive discussions today, and I wish you all the very best in your future work as you continue to make progress in Nepal. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks. Nepal is the first country to adopt the grid approach. In September 2021, Nepal adopted Kathmandu Declaration on Grid that has set a new development path to address multiple crises facing the country. The World Bank Group convened 15 development partners to provide coordinated support to Nepal's grid vision. Nepal's leadership on operationalizing grid is now more relevant than ever. The country is establishing a strategic long-term grid platform to scale up and align investments, enhance policy environment, and convene institutions and information, and is preparing the grid strategic action plan. I would now want to move on to the first session of this event, which is called Evolving the Bank's Evolution Roadmap, Operationalizing Nepal's Vision for Grid in Forest Landscapes. This is going to be divided into 3 presentations. The first presentation is going to be delivered by Mr. Sri Krishna Nepal, Joint Secretary, International Economic Cooperation and Coordination Division, Ministry of Finance. May I please welcome Mr. Sri Krishna Nepal.
So thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking you all for making time to be here. Respected Finance Secretary, Excellency Ambassador of Nepal to United States, Executive Directors from your United States of America and SEBAG, and distinguished participants, development partners, colleagues, and friends. So this is, maybe we go to the first slide. Is it okay? Okay, to the next. So thank you. This is just a quick flashback of Kathmandu Declaration on Greed, which was already mentioned by the earlier speakers. As we all know, it was endorsed by the government of Nepal along with 16 development partners in September 2021. In fact, it sets Nepal's overall vision and commitment on greed approach. So just to quickly, what does greed mean for us, actually? The green, resilient, and inclusive. So firstly, the sustainability. We would be looking for the sustainable economic growth with jobs, and also with the sustainable livelihoods. Similarly, resilient, that's from the multiple shocks as we have been struggling with, so it would bounce us back to the normalcy. And inclusive, that would be engaging everyone. I think leaving no one behind. Actually, everyone's participation would be very much valued on that part during the course. So maybe this slide actually sets a background of today's discussion. So Nepal is facing multiple challenges due to different crises, and COVID has exposed our structural weaknesses actually. And then it reversed long-forward development goals, and the gains that we had achieved, and it educated us about the interdependence of people, planet, and economy. And as we talk about the persistent challenges, the poverty, inequality, climate change, natural capital degradation, the global economic slowdown, and unemployment, that comes in the top of the order. In fact, these are interrelated challenges. So combined risks, intensifying climate change, and environmental stress are set to compound Nepal's macroeconomic challenges. So let me just move on to the next issue, which is the Nepal's greed strategic and action plan that we have been working on. So actually the process is going on. It's under preparation and expected to approve by July this year. And it will identify policy and institutional actions to be carried out by all three tiers of the governments. It would set quantified targets, sufficiently engage stakeholders during the process. It will assess challenges, opportunities, and possible trade-offs during transition. Finally, it will come up with concrete priorities and estimate of financing needs. So the prioritization criteria for greed transition, just let me just briefly mention about there is a need to prioritize greed investments. So actions and policies. If we don't do it, greed becomes everything. And then if everything includes, nothing will be achieved. So that's what the syndrome we have. And then Nepal is already doing a lot on greed-related works. So hydropower, community forestry, that we also already heard earlier. But to get to scale and transform the economy to more sustainable, efficient, resilient, and inclusive, we need to narrow down the interventions to the important action that can trigger and sustain change. So what would be the priorities, of course, during the transition towards the greed approach? So there are several priorities of greed transitions under considerations. The one we are concerned with at today's event is agriculture, water, landscape nexus. So greed transitions include green resilient cities, resilient roads, and sustainable transport. Air quality, disaster risk management, solid waste management, land administration, renewable energy. So similarly, these transitions are enabled by leveraging human capital, social and financial inclusion, and digital development. So let me just briefly mention about the water, agriculture, and forest transition nexus. So how that it would be during the implementation of the water, agriculture, and forest nexus and strategic. So then to the water, agriculture, and forest transition should enhance sectoral performances, livelihoods, and climate resilience. It creates positive synergy by taking a more integrated and participatory approach to managing the resources and assets in the landscape, including crops, livestock, forest, watershed management, and infrastructure. It is noteworthy that Nepal has enormous successes to build upon. So like community forestry, for example, and other user group approach in irrigation, water supplies, and agriculture. So the challenges we are working on now is how to establish the models to scale up integrated landscape approach. To address climate change, a programmatic approach to investment is needed. We are working on the new policies through Grid TPC with the World Bank. So we have already completed first GREET TPC, and then now we have been working on the second. So this slide summarizes the transition of Nepal's rural economy into more sustainable, resilient, and economically inclusive. As Nepal's rural economy today is having several constraints and challenges, we would be transitioning to more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient society by 2045 as we attain maybe net zero target. So this slide is basically relates to us, actually, Ministry of Finance. It talks about the financing need. So it gives us broad prospect of funding need in water, agriculture, and forest sector. We can see significant funding gap. Sources of financing need to be upscaled, and new and innovative source of financing is required. For example, private financing, including FDI, could be an option to leverage resources in addressing funding gap. So let me just briefly mention the different scenarios. So we are currently assessing various financing scenarios based on estimated cost, mainly 3 different scenarios. Having clarity on this, we can prioritize, sequence, and scale up interventions going forward. So with the interest of time, I think let me summarize with this final slide. It is obvious we need to have a clear plan to address financing gap. Of course, the government budget would be at the top, and upscale ODA, of course, in front of you, development partners together today, and leveraging private capital that Excellency Ambassador was also raising is like how can we bring in private sector, engage them during the course of implementation. And that would be the main sources of financing. We will need to focus on quality, not simply on the volume of spending. So we expect, as we design high quality projects, that eventually can attract new source of financing. So with this, let me stop here. Thanks for your patience during my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your comprehensive presentation. May I please now welcome Mr. Sindhu Prasad, for Joint Secretary, Ministry of Forests and Environment, to present on achievements and lessons from Nepal's community forest management.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Nepalese Ambassador to United States, respected Secretary and Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Finance, Chairperson of FECOFUN, and also the Member of Province Assembly, Ms. Bharati Pathak, a previous Ambassador to United States, Dr. Arjun Karki, colleagues from the World Bank, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the World Bank Group to invite us, the Ministry of Forest and Environment, to give a presentation on one of the iconic programs of the Ministry or the Government of Nepal on community forestry, particularly the achievements and challenges of community forestry. Community forestry is a success, but it has more potential to contribute to Nepal's economy because the opportunities for community forestry has increased. Number one opportunity is the area of forest has increased, both in terms of area as well as quality. Opportunity number two, Nepal is rich in medicinal and aromatic plants, not only in the high mountains, but also when we carried out a study 2 years ago, we have potential to grow, cultivate medicinal and aromatic plants in all 7 provinces across the country. Opportunity number 3, we have contributed a lot, and also the number of mega fauna has increased significantly, including Royal Bengal tiger and one-horned rhino. This is an indicator of growing healthy ecosystems because the mega fauna are the good indicator of ecosystems. Opportunity number 4, Nepal has transitioned to carbon trading by signing an emission reduction payment agreement with the World Bank in 2021, and also we are doing the same for other partners in the days to come. So with these opportunities now, the community forestry is in the way to contribute the economy, and we have prioritized community forestry as an iconic program. How community forestry can contribute to national economy? Number one, I mean, the logical sequence would be, first, we should be investing in sustainable management of community forestry. And by that, we will have 4 kind of products and services, or I can say the enterprises for forest-based products and services. Number 1, timber-based enterprises. Number 2, non-timber forest products such as medicinal and aromatic plants. Number 3, wildlife farming, because the number of wildlife has increased. And also the number 4, carbon trading. Number 5, bioenergy, and ultimately nature-based tourism. But we carry out, because we are talking about grid, we will be carrying out these activities within the premises of environmental safeguards as well as social safeguard and gender equality. So our ultimate goal everywhere in the world, the goal of forestry sector or the natural resources is to contribute to biodiversity conservation, climate resilience, and socio-economic and cultural prosperity. So as my colleague, Mr. Sri Krishna Nepal told earlier, I'm summarizing the whole Kathmandu Declaration on grid. So out of all those activities, Ministry of Forest and Environment will be contributing through community forestry on these 4 activities of grid: sustainable forest management, biodiversity conservation, small and medium enterprises, and also green jobs. Nepal's forest landscape can be broadly divided into 3 major groups: private forest, national forest, and protected area system. But private forest is not much as significant as the national forest. We only have scattered trees around households that cannot be defined as forest. Actually, we have 6 million hectares of forest. These are natural forests or national forests, and that national forest, out of the national forest, about 18% lie in protected area systems, and remaining 4.93 million or almost 5 million hectares. These can be managed under different kind of community-based forest management. For example, collaborative forest, leasehold, religious forest conservation areas. But in terms of the engagement of people and people's leadership in management, the community forest out of other management systems is a significant. And also we have government managed. It's actually not managed but owned by the government. So what we would like to do is all the government managed forest will be gradually transferred to the community, like the community forest. This is our forest landscape. So this is the statistics of community forest so far. So I will not go through all of them, but there are 22,519 user groups. And actually about 65% of Nepalese people are engaged in community forest one way or the other, in leadership or as a participant. And about 35% of Nepal's total forest has already been handed over to community forest. So we have achieved significantly in different capital formation. For example, natural assets, financial assets. I would not go through all of them, but in terms of natural assets, this is NASA's image recently produced in February 2023, and I would like to reinforce the quotation by the NASA. It is after relinquishing control of forest to the villages that depend on them, forest cover in this small mountainous country nearly doubled. So these are the images, one in 1992 and the other in 2016. So natural capital has significantly increased, as I told earlier. The potential contribution of community forest. This is the statistics from Nepal's environmental sector diagnostic carried out by the World Bank, and I was part of that study on the part of the government. The timber production currently, when we manage only 2 million out of 6 million hectare of forest, the current timber production of just about 1 million cubic meter, but that it can be increased by 3 times by 2030. And rent from forest, the current rent from forest is around 70 million US dollar. So it can be increased 7 times. Also the taxes, VAT, value-added tax, all those things, that can be increased by 7 times. Employment, it is currently 20,000, that can be increased by 5 times. Women leadership, number of women chairpersons, currently there are 1,300. So our target is to increase to 12,000. Then I will give an example how community forestry is contributing to women leadership in the country. This is the only program in Nepal that has a mandatory provision for either chairperson or the secretary in the community, in the committee. And also, you can see one example here, Ms. Bharati Pathak. He used to be a very grassroots lay person, and she joined community forest, and she became the treasurer of the FECOFON, Federation of Community Forestry Users. That is one of the largest civil society organizations in the world. And then she became the president of that FECOFON, and now she is member of province assembly. So the way how women are developed from community forestry, she is an example. Community forestry has some issues, but the issues are changing. When the community forestry has come a long way. It started in 1970s. During that time, our issues were how to protect forest and how to regenerate, degraded lands, and also the issue with the people was how to engage them in a group. And the objective during that time was how to fulfill basic forest needs. But it changed after 1995. The issue of forest was no more protection, because protection was somehow achieved. So the second generation issue was how to manage forest, how to improve the governance of group, because group were already formed, and how to contribute to livelihood. But now, since after 2015, the issues had changed, because all those issues were resolved. So the new issue are the area where we need to invest a lot. So it's no more forest management. The management should be sustainable forest management. Community land tenure. People want more right. The complete bundle of right over the land. So that is issue. So that need to be invested. And second one is it's not only group governance but inclusive leadership of women, indigenous peoples, and other people, other marginalized section of the society. The objectives of today's community forest is forest-based enterprises, RED+, that is the carbon trading, economic contribution, equitable benefit sharing, etc. Actually, community forestry is at the crossroad everywhere in the world, in Thailand, in Laos, in Nepal, in India, wherever. So if we are questioning current form of community forestry, that is the state-community partnership. If we are questioning that kind of model, then we have other 3 options. Either you privatize forest, assign private property right to forest, or you nationalize forest. In Nepal, these two models were already practiced and failed. The third alternative would be community forestry, in a sense, fully tenure right assigned to local community. That can be a kind of more, very much radical. So that's why I think today's model would be, again, state-community partnership, but the state-community partnership should be, in a way, the current form of state-community partnership is we have only 3 actors at the moment: the federal government, province government, and local people in community forest. Since 2015, we moved to Forest for Prosperity program, and that is the game changer program, and this is my last slide. The new model we are proposing for the community forestry to contribute to Nepal's prosperity is the 3 actors will remain the same. We are adding 4 other actors. That is, 1 actor is private sector. that should be engaged in community forest. Another actor is local government, which is completely aloof at the moment. I mean, so we are proposing the partnership with the local government, and also we are supporting banks and financial institutions. They will provide finance. So far, it is only the government channel that provides support to local community, but there will be banks supporting sustainable forest management and forest enterprises, and also indigenous peoples. And we are adding 3 more activities, that is sustainable forest management, small, medium enterprises, and also social and environmental safeguards. So this will be our new model for Forest for Prosperity. That is one of the 18 game changer project of Nepal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sindhu Prasad Dungana, for your insightful presentation. May I call upon Ms. Mirin Shakirova, Natural Resource Management Specialist, the World Bank, for her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Miriam Shakirova. I am a natural resource management specialist. I live in Nepal. I'm based in Kathmandu, and today I will just briefly present what the World Bank does in the Nepal's forest landscapes. We are actually a little bit behind the time, so I'll try to be as short as possible so we can enjoy the next 2 sessions. So I would just like to echo the previous presenters on the importance of the green, resilient, and inclusive development for Nepal. The World Bank is committed to support the government in Nepal to put in green in practice, together with other development partners. The COVID-19 pandemic, conflicts, climate change, and other environmental risks, among others, they really slowed down the economic growth. And I think now is the time to really reshape and rethink the development path for Nepal. Economic growth can only be considered truly sustainable if human, social, and natural capital, they're part of the same equation, as the GDP, or gross domestic product, and other traditional measures. They don't really represent the whole picture that we have. It's essential that natural capital, social capital, and human capital, they're really put in the same framework when we account to the economic growth of the country. Particularly, I would like to mention that it does affect the quality of the life, the pollution, the economic value of renewable resources such as forests and croplands. It also accounts for income equality, among others. So I think this is the way that from the bank side we are looking when we talk about economic growth. The World Bank, together with the government of Nepal, has released its country climate and development report last year, and it was the first in South Asia region and third globally. And the key priority for Nepal and recommendation coming from the Nepal's country climate and development report is to really prioritize the landscape approach, integrated landscape approach in the water, agriculture, and the forest sectors. It's important for closing the water storage gap, securing local livelihoods from climate-smart crops, as well as the livestock management, and really a new era for the productive forest communities. I think it's important to emphasize the strengthening of forest governance, especially for landscape resilience. As you know, a few days ago, Nepal was facing major forest fires, and this is the resilient aspect that we all need to also consider, and it's coming under the Country Climate Development Report as part of the recommendations. So what do we do? How does the World Bank support the Nepal forest landscapes? We actually, right now, in the timing where a lot of investments carbon financing, as well as analytical work that the World Bank, together with the government of Nepal, we are doing right now. It includes carbon financing operation from the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. It includes the investment operations through Forest for Prosperity project financed by the Climate Investment Funds. It has a dedicated grant mechanism project that is directly implemented and developed by indigenous peoples and local communities. Also, of course, it's all goes together under the programmatic DPC series, Development Policy Financing series on greed. There is another project that is being currently prepared that is called Enable. I see some colleagues here. So you can see here, this in dark blue, these are direct investments to support indigenous peoples and local communities. And there are a lot of projects as well on the right side where the government is leading the forestry engagement there. And if you can see, in the last 10 years, only as a year ago, we really started strategically investing in the forest landscape in different interventions through the government and community forest user groups. So this is the momentum now, and I just want to present the ongoing portfolio that we have. This is just the beginning, but we need to do more and better, and through the integrated landscape approach, that is also part of the CCDR recommendation and part of the dialogue today. So I'll stop here, and I hope you enjoy the next 2 sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam, for letting us a very deep insight into World Bank operations on the ongoing program for the World Bank. May I now please call upon Steve, who's going to be moderating the next session.
Okay, thank you, Aishima, and welcome everyone. You can hear me, right? Okay, yeah, thank you. Very good. I'm Steve Daniel. I'm the program leader for sustainable development based in Kathmandu, but we need to really get up to time on this event. So without further ado, I'd like to call the panelists to the stage, where we'll have a 30-minute discussion on what we've seen and what comes next. So may I start with Dr. Arjun Karki. He's the head of Rural Reconstruction Nepal, which is responsible for implementing the DGM Nepal project on indigenous people, local communities. So have a seat anywhere you like, sir. May I call on my notes? Ms. Bharati Patak. She's the chairperson of FECOFUN, which is the Federation of Community Forestry Users in Nepal. And she's now a member of parliament as well, who's just got elected. We also have 3 people who are here in Washington, D.C., who manage various climate funds. We have Ms. Hannah Fairbank, Regional Coordinator for Asia and Senior Biodiversity Specialist of the Global Environment Facility. She also, in an earlier incantation in her career, worked in Nepal on community forestry. Mr. Andre Espejo, Fund Manager for the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, which is providing support with many development partners to Nepal on forest carbon. And lastly, Manu Quadio, Forest Investment Program Coordinator of the Climate Investment Funds that's hosted here at the World Bank on behalf of the multilateral development banks. So what I wanted to do was have a quick conversation about the success factors and the opportunities and the challenges that are faced by indigenous people in local communities in community forestry in Nepal, and what can be done to scale up the successes. So maybe we could start with Ms. Bharati, ladies first, and you could let us know what you see as the main opportunities and the main areas to work on in Nepal on community forestry. You can use this microphone, please.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much. We have a big success already present before Dr. Sindhu and from the Finance Ministry also, and our success for the Community Forest Users Group. This is the very role model groups. You already aware about the community forest users group. This is a very inclusive, and there is the all member of the household member, not individual member. So CFUGR coverage to the all household. There is the indigenous peoples and the different ethnic group, and the all women's are affiliated with the community forest users group. So this is the very success in Nepal. Especially CFUG are contributing to the conserve the biodiversity, especially before the 30 years, all land were very gray, and now is the improving to a greenery, not only greenery, and protect the forests and water and the land also for the community forest users group. And the community forest users group are playing to the very important role. Already Sindhu said to here and increase the forest area, and the 45% forest area in increasing more contribution for the community forest users group. And another is the very good beauty for the community forest users group. There is a very democratic practice inside the community forest users group, and there is the very inclusive policies, and our forest ministry also made a community forestry guideline more highlighted for the women leadership. Now we have more than 100,000 women are taking the leadership in community forest users group. Not only women, there is the indigenous people are leading, and the Dalit and other groups also. This is the very success in Nepal. And another is the and the community forest users group and the other indigenous group who are working together. We are facing the many challenges also. I will share after the success story. And the indigenous peoples and the local community are working together. I think maybe my experience, I'm remembering to the before the 10 years, we were in the different side, and different local community are working separately, and indigenous people are working separately. Now we are raising the voice for the very collective rights for the natural resources for the people. And we are getting the rights for the only tree rights, not land rights. So we are advocating continue. And another is the success for the Nepal. And together, I already mentioned in here, IPLCs, such as in the delegated grant mechanism, we are working together. And the different other network also are together. And we are raising the voice for the collective land rights also together. And the different networks and different layer, and the local level and province level and national level, we are together. This is the very beauty. And another is the community forest users group are not, and IPLC are not protecting the natural resource. This is the best practice, best success story. They are developing to the leadership also. I already mentioned more than 100,000 women are taking the leadership in the community forest users group, and the more than 2,500 community forestry leaders are elected in the local government recently. And similarly, 35 community leaders are elected in the parliament member. So this is the big achievement. This is the very good platform, and the develop the leadership and the protecting the forest and biodiversity, and they have a practice of the adaptation part, mitigation part, and they have a more traditional knowledge, and they are trying to establish a micro enterprise and creating the green job also through the forest resource. This is the best practice and the success also in Nepal. And another, through the FECO fund facilitation, Federation of Community Forest Users Group are facilitating with the local government. So we are trying to, and we have a 753 local government with us, and more than 100 local government are formulated local forest acts. That is very inclusive. They are recognize the customary practice and the women leadership and Dalit and the community forest users group, and different groups' rights are highlighted to the local forest acts. This is the very good practice and the very model for the Nepal. So this is the success for the Nepal. I'm just highlighting some very simple point. And another, we are facing some challenges also. And we have opportunity also. We have a sustainable users group and the customary groups in the grassroots level. We have a big civil society organization and network. We are working together. So this is the opportunity with us work to the create the green job and the other many activities also. And we are facing some challenges. No more investment for the sustainable forest management. No more investing to the local community and indigenous people. No more access to the local community and indigenous people in the climate finance. We need to think for the support to the finance, very totally different mechanism. We need to think, we need to prepare to the mechanism easy for how can access to the local community, indigenous people and women in the finance. Because we need to empower for the local community and indigenous people, economic empowerment. So this is the one of the challenge we are facing. And another is the, we are raising the voice for the collective land rights also, not getting the land rights, and the state also controlling the land, and the community are only managing the forest. So these types of the challenges we are also facing. I'm going to final. And another is the no more recognized for the local community and indigenous people's contribution, and the national policy making process and the international platform also, and the decision making process. Now here is the recognizing, but sometimes the local community and indigenous people voice are not like documented in the policy making process. Thank you. I'll come again.
Thank you, Bharati. I appreciate it very much. Shifting, staying with Nepal and shifting to Dr. Arjun Karki, we were wondering what your perspective is on ensuring that indigenous people and local communities do indeed have an authentic voice in managing their forest resources. What do you think is working well, and what are areas that for improvement?
Okay. Thank you Thank you very much. In fact, Bharati's presentation made my own work easier, and also I would like to congratulate Sindhu and Sri Krishna for this wonderful presentation about what's going on in Nepal and what we are planning to achieve in near future. So, yeah. Thank you very much for this very important questions. What is working and what is not? In fact, what I have observed during my work related to forest and environment is, in fact, when we design project, when we think about mobilizing resources, we need to able to ensure country ownership and use the country systems, empower them. Country leadership is very important. And country leadership doesn't mean only government leadership. It includes indigenous people, local community, women, Dalit, marginalized section of our society, particularly those who are living in remote and rural areas. And DGM is, perhaps we are just starting, but it can be a model where we work under the leadership of very distinguished civil society organization, FECOFON and EFIN. They are leading the National Steering Committee, but bringing all sections of Nepali society together, and they are providing guidance. So this is one of the success story we can think of. And I would also like to really emphasize the inclusive part of the grid. So if you look at the Central and Transformative Development Agenda of the United Nations, SDG 2030, it says that leave no one behind. We often talk about symptoms of the problem that we are struggling with. We address the symptoms, but not the causes. We need to look at the root cause of the problem. What creates and perpetuates the problem that we are struggling with? It's very important for us to understand. And if we are able to address the root causes, then we can get rid of the problem that we are facing. Similarly, and again, financing part. Yeah, we have enough funding at this moment, but quality is more important than quantity. So we need to put money where our mouth is. We need to walk the talk. Only then we can address the challenges that we are facing. So another issue I would like to really mention here is our poverty, our development challenges are integrated. So we need to have an integrated approach. In an organization that I'm leading now, we use fourfold approach, that is health, education, livelihood, and self-government. So integrated poverty can only be addressed through integrated approach. This is very important for us to understand. And the last point that I would like to mention here is, we talk about environment, we talk about biodiversity, sustainable development. Every effort we think of addressing the challenges, climate, environment, forest-related challenge, we need to think about how these endeavors are going to help us to address the life and livelihood of poor, marginalized people of our countries. If our environment program, our forest conservation program doesn't help us to address the livelihood issues, food security, we cannot really make it successful. And for this, we need, again, I would like to underline that use country system, country ownership, country leadership, and also leadership of IP and LC. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Karki. I really like what you said about, it's more than just the quantity of financing, it's the quality of financing. Identifying scalable models is something that we all seek. Maybe we could shift to the various managers of the different climate and environment funds to get their perspectives on that last point. So maybe over to Manu, who heads the Forest Investment Program. So the question here is a follow-up to what Dr. Karki said, is how do you think the funds that you manage can best contribute to quality of financing, quality of development outcomes in Nepal?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, really thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for inviting the CIF. And, by kind of listening to all the presenters that just passed, I think I can tell to the audience, be relaxed. I think the CIF have offered a model. If you leave a great model, we at the CIF, we are implementing three type of investments in Nepal. Previously, since 2008, Nepal joined the CIF since 2008. We are implementing the program, the pilot program for climate resilience, our PPCR program. We are implementing our renewable energy program. We are also implementing the forest investment program. And so this free program kind of provides a real basis for the grid. And the good news is that at least the PPCR program, for example, in Nepal has been fully completed. We have kind of implementing right now the fifth program, and also and also the renewable energy program. And on top of that, we are also providing funding for the DGM program. Mr. Barati is kind of leading there. So when I look at the business model of a crate, I think the SIF models, the three programs in the countries, provides relevant information that can be used to successfully implement the crate model. So for us, something that I think is very important, and some of the presentation mentions, is a business model of a SIF. We use a very country-driven, participatory approach to develop investment plan. It's not a project-by-project approach. It's very country-driven. That all the key stakeholders at the country level, for the government, for the civil society organization, private sector entities, also the local communities and indigenous people. So I think this business model that really go through a full process of identifying the key issue of climate issues at the country level have been implemented successfully in Nepal in different audience. So I think it's very important that we learn from that. And the good news that we are currently evaluating the FEE project, the pre-program, that will provide a lot of lessons learned of what has worked well, what needs to be improved. And so I want to say that we have the model for the grades. We are kind of evaluating this program, and the lessons that we learn can be really shared with the Nepal team that can be useful for the grades when we move forward. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Manu. I appreciate it very much. I like your point about taking a programmatic approach to convene different financing instruments. Of course, the private sector will also be very important coming into this as well. Let's shift to Andre, who is leading one of these complementary instruments, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. So over to you, Andre. How would you react to what Manu said? How can the funds you manage best contribute in Nepal to achieving impact in this sector?
Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. So I really believe that what we are seeing in different countries, and including Nepal, is that these different sources of finance can basically complement each other, right? So we have, we know now about the FIP, but we also have, IBRD IDA, or we have, JEF, or other sources of activity-based finance, and which complemented with the result-based, finance, like, for example, from the FCPF, or other sources, basically it can basically cause a transformative change, right? So basically you have all the upfront investment that generates the enabling environment, mitigation actions on the ground that will lead to generation of emission reductions and mitigation outcomes, and then you have the payments for those emission reductions, and then that finance is reinvested in the ground, right? If you do this you have several iterations of that cycle. Basically, it could be a virtuous cycle that we call, right? That basically enables is a cycle that is self-sustained, but also enables the expansion and the scaling up of that investment on the ground, right? And basically, reach higher ambition for the country, etc. The thing is, looking at Marine's slide, I think that Nepal has all the ingredients, but we need not only sources of finance, but we need two things. We need, and I agree with our colleagues, we need high quality investments. What does it mean? So high quality investments, it means, okay, good design, but it also means a lot of basically, social inclusion, right? So what we are seeing is that, without social inclusion, you're not going to have sustainable, mitigation actions. And also you are not involving, for example, IPLCs in the decarbonization journey. It basically, it's not including, part of or not creating a sustainable solution. The second, and that's an area that we have been supporting as part of the FCPF and now through Enable, as Miriam was mentioning, right? So that's a very important part. The second piece of a high quality investment is basically has to be a model that can be scaled up. And when I say scaled up, is of course, is basically, okay, you make investments on systems on the ground that, with additional flows of finance, it enables like the geographical expansion of activities, but it also lead to expansion to other sectors, right? So for example, in our programs, what we see is countries like Mozambique or Costa Rica, that they have begun They have an integrated landscape program. They have begun with the forestry sector, and now they are looking, okay, now let's expand to agricultural sector, to energy sector, basically using exactly the same model. No? And I think what Nepal is taking many of the boxes, but I think that those two key items will be critical for the success of GRID.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andre. Maybe turning to Hannah for the last word. We have to move on very quickly to session 3. So Hannah, with the Global Environment Facility, of course, for 2 decades has been for 3 decades now has been investing in global public goods, and this is a topic that the World Bank is very concerned about now as we consider what we call our evolution roadmap. Yet our clients are concerned about resilience and adaptation. In the forest sector and with landscapes more broadly, we can achieve all of that at the same time. When you think about those issues, what is it that the GEF is looking for when you make investment decisions, thematically, in terms of some of these topics we're talking about? What are your criteria for success, and what are you looking for?
Great. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. I won't go on too long, but it's a great question, and I've been very much interested in the conversation so far. It's really great to get an update on community forestry in Nepal, so I really appreciate it. Most of you are probably aware that the GEF really funds action at this intersection between national priorities and countries' commitments under the global environmental agreements that we serve. There are currently 5, and they seem to be growing, which is exciting. Really, Steve, I think what you outlined is like the fact that sustainable management of natural resources and mitigating climate change really provides a basis and is essential for long-term sustainable development. We really can't separate these. And so looking forward, we have just launched GEF 8, which is a new strategy built on the best science, evidence, experience of the international community in producing global environmental benefits. And kind of we're looking at 4 key themes here for GEF 8, which runs through 2026. I would not foresee any big changes going through 2030. So this is, we're really looking at GEF 8 and then GEF 9 beyond that. So one, we've heard this theme a little bit today, is integration for system transformation. We can no longer work in these silos, both institutionally, sectorally. We really need to work in a multi-sectoral fashion, whether that be private sector coming together with government, coming together with civil society, and others. There are some great examples like taking a landscape scale approach, multi-jurisdictional approach that others on the panel know much more about. It's a really effective model for this. New institutional arrangements. Our CEO was a 3-time environment minister in Costa Rica and was actually very successful in combining ministries across sectors. And so that's a type of model to look at for integration. The second is really policy coherence. And so what does that mean? Ensuring that the legislative and legal and regulatory framework is in place to align public and private investment for this nature positive, carbon neutral future that we're all looking toward. And that can do a couple of things. Obviously, narrowing that financing gap that we're hearing so much about, making sure that the right and left hands are working together toward these big goals, whether that be eliminating subsidies, making sure that ministries are working together, and also obviously increase the durability of investments over time. So we make sure that we're not working against our goals. Third here is the domestic resource mobilization. We've heard a lot about that. I won't go on too long, but really looking beyond just the grants that the GEF and others are providing, the MDB loans, but also mobilizing and aligning across private sector. We have some really interesting new non-grant instrument and blended finance in GEF 8, et cetera. And then the final one is really the topic that we came here on this panel to talk most about, which is inclusion and equity. So for development to be truly sustainable, it must be socially inclusive. I think Nepal has excellent examples of where this has worked. It's been some of the most interesting work that I've done in my career around forestry in Nepal, and it's a great honor to be on this panel, and looking at how we center women, Dalits, and others in that. I think the work of Nepal and community forestry can really be a model. So how do we scale that up? Just my final note here is we have the operational focal point and the political focal point for the Jeff here, sitting on either side of the ambassador. So it's really, really nice to see you all, and I look forward to meeting you after. We have an inclusive conservation initiative, and Nepal is part of that, direct support to IPLCs. And Jeff 7, and then Jeff 8, Nepal has been so incredibly proactive that within the first year of Jeff 8 has already sketched out the contours of the investment of Jeff funds in 3 integrated programs with incentive on top of their country allocations, and has $20 million in LDCF adaptation funds that are currently under consideration. And we have my colleague Dorji somewhere in the back. So looking toward nature-based solutions and the design of the LDCF moving forward. So there we go. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Andre, and thank you, Dr. Karki, and thank you, the full panel. Let's hear it for the panel, everyone, so we can... Since we're running short on time, I think we should move directly to session 3, so I'll spare you the summary of this panel. And so I'd like to call Faris up, the country director for Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Nepal, to moderate the next session with an esteemed panel. I'm sorry? Do I call the colleagues? Or? Yeah, I am.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I'm very much looking forward to the next panel, and I'd like to invest and invite. I'll invest in you, and I'll also invite you. You can see I'm preparing for the Sri Lanka CPF, so it's all about investments. May I ask my colleagues, and I'll introduce you, Martin, Valerie, Lou. John, please join us. I'm very happy to introduce my colleagues, of course, and I'll go quickly with the introduction. Mr. John Room is the Regional Director for Sustainable Development in the South Asia region. Ms. Valerie Hickey is the Global Director for Environment, Natural Resources, and the Blue Economy, ENB. We had our colleague Saroj, who couldn't make it due to family circumstances. We shall miss him. He was the Global Director for Water. And my colleague Louise Cord, who's the Global Director for Social Sustainability and Inclusive Global Practice, Inclusion Global Practice, excuse me. And last but certainly not least, our colleague Martin van Ukoop, who's the Global Director for Agriculture and Food Global Practice. So you can see a very hard-hitting group of people. And I think if they can't answer my questions, I fear nobody else can. So look, thank you very much. I do want to invite also from the government of Nepal, Mr. Sri Krishna Nepal, who's the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And I think we have everybody here. So look, in the interest of time, I'll make it very quick. And I'm really happy that the sequence is as it is, because we just heard from the communities and different civil society and other organizations of their perspective, and it's nice to sort of complement it with a view from the international organizations and the global experts. Just a little bit of a reflection of things that you probably already know about Nepal, and a lot of the exciting stuff that's going on with the grid. I want to focus specifically on the SWAF, water, agriculture, forestry nexus, and as you know, and as has been discussed, one of the priorities that emerged from the World Bank's CDR, which is the Country Climate and Development Report, and also the Grid Strategic Plan. As my colleague said, Nepal is a front runner in having the Kathmandu Declaration and really adopting and infusing grid as part of its national strategy, is to transform really the rural economy by taking an integrated approach and looking at integrated landscape approach and looking at water, agriculture, and forestry nexus. And now with the grid DPC that Steve has talked about, we're trying to operationalize that with laws, regulations, and policies and practices. Now, it's interesting in Nepal, not unique from others, but just to give you a sense of how important the agricultural sector is. Nepal's agricultural and forestry sector constitutes 30% of the country's GDP. and is the primary source of livelihoods for 2 out of 3 of the country's population, especially the poor. So you can get a sense of how important it is. Natural resources, forests, soil, and water provide primary buffer against climate-induced natural disasters such as floods, heat, landslides, and drought. And I have to say, I've spent 5 years as first country manager and then country director in Nepal, and even in those few years, I can see a tangible increase in the variability. I'm actually seeing it. I mean, it's horrifyingly fast, I have to say. But unfortunately, despite our best efforts, we still see that water and forestry and land resources continue to be used in a very project-to-project basis without adequate consideration of the systems as a whole. And with these extremes that I referred to, that being on the rise, we see a lot greater flood and drought risks, etc. So they seem to be complementing each other in a very adverse way. The agriculture sector is likely to be hit hard by this climate variability, further straining forests, soil, water, and other natural assets. And as you know, forests are a very important carbon sink, but are highly susceptible to increasing temperatures. I remember recently, if you recall, we went to Rupa Lake. Sorry, I'm just reminiscing here. I'm taking over your time, which I shouldn't be doing, but it's really important to say. And we visited, we saw this in practice, actually. The Rupa Lake community, it's a beautiful place. They really had, a long time ago, not too long ago, but they benefited from a small grant to support fish production. Under an old bank-financed operation, which has long been closed, and it's actually pretty delicious fish, I have to say. Over time, the community realized that to develop the fish value chain, the lake needed to be protected. And to do this, they worked with the local community forest group, which was, I remember, on the left side, up in the mountains, to provide upstream support on that. And it was really symbiotic, because at that time also the community forest user group was also finding ways to shift from conservation to sustainable production. So it was really, really a good potential symbiosis at that time. It was successful, but what was really important was its grid in action at the local level. At the local level. Let's remember, Nepal is effectively, it's an old country, a very rich culture, very diverse culture, but as a country, it's effectively 8 years old since, it's actually not 8, but since the new, at that point, the new constitution came on board, and we have a federal democratic republic. So many of the things are fairly new. And I think that was a great story. So with that backdrop, and forgive me for the long introduction, but I thought it had to be made, I'll start with the questions. And if it's okay with you, first we'll talk about WAF. And I'll reach out. I'll ask you first, John, and Valerie and Martin, and then Lou. I want to ask you specifically a question on resilience and indigenous people, if that's okay. So let me start with you, Martin, since you're on my left. And when we look at the water and agriculture and environment nexus, how can this landscape perspective help deliver sector performance and resilience in water, agriculture, and forest sectors, as well as other sectors, of course, like transport, hydropower, and tourism? So how do you see it? What are good examples, and what are the practical solutions that have worked and that Nepal might want to consider? Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Fariz, and thanks for inviting me. I think the last time I was in Nepal, it's a few years ago, of course, before COVID, and it was for the dissemination of the country profile that we did for climate smart agriculture. And I think it was quite interesting, because actually, if you look at the opportunities and technologies that exist that farmers could actually adopt, to introduce and mainstream climate smart agriculture, there are many opportunities. There are many opportunities for triple win solutions, actually, technologies that simultaneously improve productivity, improve resilience, and actually reduce the carbon footprint. The question then is, then if it's so attractive, so why are farmers not doing it? I think we came across, two important points. One is that we know that actually that, climate smart agriculture solutions, there are no silver bullets. So basically, climate smart agriculture solutions come in packages. And for that reason, they need to be put in a kind of a watershed or landscape management context. And for that reason, adopting a package of solutions, means knowledge transfer. And what we see in many countries, actually, that countries are underinvesting in the agricultural research extension services, including, I think, Nepal, because many countries do it. So knowledge transfer, I think, is very important. The second thing is, there are no blueprints. So it's not that you can, in agriculture, there's an electric car and everybody can use it. The solutions need to be adapted to the local conditions. And what you very often see is that in a limited agricultural research innovation budget, that most of actually is going upstream in more the strategic research, and actually very little is going to the adapted research. So a better balance between upstream and downstream research is needed. And the third is that, the reason why farmers are not adopting, those climate smart agriculture technologies, of course, is a question whether they get the right incentives. And of course, if you look around in many countries in the world, you see significant public support to agriculture. But actually, very little is going to public goods. And also from a global perspective, actually, very little of that public support is actually ending up in the hand of farmers. So the question then is, is it the case in Nepal that farmers, and for that matter, private sector actually, is getting the right incentives to invest in resilient agriculture, to invest in healthy soils, to invest in agroforestry, to invest in greening supply chains? Probably if you put an integrated approach was being talked about and put this integrated lens, on the government's policies and public support programs, I think you will see vast areas of improvements. We are, as Agriculture and Food Global Practice, engaging in quite a few countries now in this kind of upstream analytics from a food systems perspective, to what extent, public policies and public support programs provide the right incentives. And we see many opportunities for improvement. And that goes back to what I said, I think what was said earlier as well, on the financing gap. When people talk about the financing gap, very quickly, the thought is about how can we identify additional sources of financing, which needs to happen probably. But I think in the previous panel, I would also mention the quality of existing spending. And I think there's also a major improvement and opportunities that can be made. So in a nutshell then, Faris, I think investing in agricultural research innovation to facilitate this knowledge transfer and that solutions can be adapted to local conditions, and making sure that there's an incentive framework in place actually to provide farmers in the private sector the right incentive to invest in resilient agriculture.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's very helpful. And it's a wealth of information you've given and responses, but I'll come back. And I'm going to turn to you, Louise, on this issue of incentives and public goods, and I'll tell you why later. John, can I turn to you and then to Valerie on the same? I'd like to hear some contradictions and arguments.
Very good. Well, maybe something different. So first of all, as I look around, particularly at the men on this panel, I owe you all a partial apology. I don't have a jacket and tie on, but at least I'm wearing green, which is appropriate for what we're talking about. Now, main message, or two messages. First of all, just wow. Aren't you all excited hearing what you have heard now about the opportunities and the alignment between what everybody is saying? I was sitting here with a bunch of things I was going to say, and I crossed them out one by one as somebody else said them. So, huge alignment. So, before I go further down that road, a key message. Number one. Nepal's natural resources underpin the productive sectors and the future of the poor in this economy. Number two, if Nepal can figure out how to invest in these sectors in an integrated manner, it can simultaneously reduce poverty, increase resilience, and reduce emissions. But right now, investments are taking place in an ad hoc manner because Nepal hasn't figured out how to bring these together at scale yet. Therefore, what we need to use Ambassador Karki's words, we now need to walk the talk on delivering this integration at scale. And it's not that we don't know what the issues are. These have all been laid out here. It's a question of delivery. So to elaborate a little bit more on this, first of all, we talk about wafe and landscapes and all the rest of it. And we've heard a lot about forestry and community members behind the forestry, and that's good. And Martin talked about agriculture. But let's remember that when we say agriculture, we're talking about individual people whose livelihoods depend on this and are having to respond to this. So what's it like in agriculture? You're a small farmer in Nepal. Yeah, you get by, but a lot of your family members go abroad so that they can send remittances back because you're not making as much money as you could. Your yields are not as high as they are. You're seeing floods and landslides coming down more and more as you've had before. And you want to do something about these floods and landscapes and the irregular water, but Nepal's only got 10% water storage, so there's no infrastructure that's there in order to do it. And what you need in one part of the country is completely different to what somebody else does. So what do? How do you start putting these pieces together? And it's clear if we step back, if you want to help the agriculture piece, in addition to all the climate smart agriculture stuff that Martina's talked about, you've got to find a solution to managing this water. And if you want to manage that water, a key part of it is how you manage the forests to ensure that they protect the watersheds to manage that forest. And the Rupa Lake example is one that clearly shows what that is. But yeah, we can have a nice Rupa Lake example, and you have a nice, I'm sure you can probably put 5 or 6 more out from all over Nepal where this is working. How do you get it to scale? The short answer is it is possible. Other countries have done it. Now, you can't maybe find an exact replica of Nepal example, but Ethiopia improved its landscapes in an integrated way to rehabilitate 10 million hectares and influence the livelihoods, improve the livelihoods of 30 million people. Okay, China did the Los Pater. I could go through, you talked about Mozambique as taking the forestry into other sectors. They're starting. Sri Lanka, there's a whole bunch of these examples. Now, it's not to say there's an off-the-shelf, as somebody said, example that you can just cut and paste and here's a magic bullet for Nepal. But there are ways that you can learn and pick up issues as you go forward and adapt and go. But there are underlying all of these examples some messages and some themes that come through. Community-driven development based around a community preparation of some kind of watershed or landscape plan. But community is not enough. You need local government to provide some support and an overarching national framework to make it happen. It's going to require investments. It's going to require addressing land issues and land certificate issues, multi-donor support, and a legal framework to manage all of this. These are some of the core underlying lessons that you can pull out from Ethiopia. And I'm sure that a number of you who are much more intelligent, much more experienced than I am, will contradict me on some small little detail and refine it. But those are the core messages. But then why do I say wow? Because I then go back and have a look, where is Nepal on this? You've got a community process under the Community Forest Program. What if those principles could be extended more broadly to watersheds? I understand some of this is happening. How can you build on this? Okay, you've got a federalism that's aiming to build this local government. Might not be complete, might have a lot of challenges, but that local government place. You've got a general commitment at the national policy level around grid. You've got the donors coming behind the Kathmandu Declaration. You've got a water resources law that's coming together. All of these pieces, I think, are coming there. And when I hear all of the speakers, be they the financing agencies, Nepalese government, the bank, we're all talking the same language. All of the building blocks are there. I think the challenge, the opportunity is to push it just over the edge, and it's not going to be easy, okay? It's going to be hand-to-hand combat to try and move this forward. But if everybody's aligned on keeping the eye on the prize of poor people in Nepal, learning lessons internationally, adapting them and moving forward as we go and working together, I think there's a huge opportunity to really revolutionize the next step of what's going to happen in Nepal. And I've got to be careful with that language in Nepal, but that's it.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you for the excitement. It's really encouraging and contagious. So thank you, Valerie. May I turn to you, please, from the environment perspective, please?
I could keep this very short and just say I agree with everything that's been said, especially the wow, because I think it's true. But I wanted to try and answer a little bit John's question that he posed when he said, how do we get to scale? And the first way we get to scale, I think, is we have to walk with a little humility, because we use these terms like landscape approach as if we invented them here at the World Bank or the Nepalese government did. Poor people living in rural areas have had to live in a landscape approach forever, because they've had to find their livelihoods and the money to put food on the table and the food to put it on the table by putting together an entire basket of resources in which there's very little buffer. If one piece goes wrong, it all falls apart. So the landscape approach is the lived reality of most rural people, especially the rural poor. And this has never been more true than in the last 3 years with COVID, conflict, and climate change. Because COVID, conflict, and climate change move through the landscape. They're not static threats. When pandemics come, they don't always come in the same place. They come at the arc of deforestation often, but that moves. Climate change, we know, moves. If we knew exactly where the next flood was coming, it would be fine, but we don't. And we don't know if it's going to be a flood or a drought, and it moves through the landscape. And so does conflict. And so we really need to walk in this space with a lot of humility and learn from the communities who somehow, against the worst odds, have managed to survive for generations, taking a landscape approach. And as we look at what communities have managed to do, we're trying to replicate this approach within the bank. And we look at 4 ways that we see when we look at how communities have done this. 4 things we see. The first is planning. The first really is making sure that there's a plan in place. And the plan is not just an output, it's a process. And this is where the importance of inclusion comes in. Because at the end of the day, if a community, if some people in a community, if it's the local government isn't at the table, they're on the menu. And their desires are going to get pushed aside in favor of somebody else. So planning absolutely matters as a process as well as an output. And that output has to be dynamic. We live in a world where you can't produce a 10-year plan and expect the same resources to be available and static in year 9 as they were in year 1. And so thinking about this planning as a living document. The second thing that's really important is protecting the asset. All of us, many of us in this room, certainly Nepal, stood up strong at the CBD COP15 in Montreal to talk about the importance of nature conservation, creating a new global biodiversity framework. And a big part of that was around this 30 by 30 commitment, protecting 30% of the land by 2030. That is necessary, but not sufficient. Because when we talk about protecting the asset, it's not just the biodiversity and the forests within lines on a map that say they're protected areas. It has to be across the 100% of the landscape. We have to protect the assets, and I have to say Nepal has been one of those countries that has shown that you can protect the forests without suffering from empty forest syndrome, where you have wonderful forests and not a living thing within them. So again, we're learning from Nepal on this. The third piece that we've learned is that we really have to grow and diversify the businesses around those assets. We're not protecting nature and the forests and the water resources for its own sake. We're doing it to deliver jobs. We're doing it to deliver food. And so we have to find ways to support growing and diversifying those businesses. And I think the one thing that has stopped that from often happening is finance. And Dr. Arjuna was right that quality matters, but there's one place where quantity matters. And that's when it comes to indigenous peoples, local communities, small farmers being able to access local credit markets. There isn't enough. They're not plugged into the local credit markets. We have to figure out and put more money into that space. On quality, we have to think about access. Dr. Kugler talked about, when she started this morning, the importance of partnership in this space. And partnership is absolutely incredibly important. But the problem is today, too often, partnership exists on a patronage model. You have a big partner who gives out little bits of money to small partners, but never lets those small partners rise up. They become a choke point to choke off the capacity of smaller organizations. We have to move from a patronage model to a parenting model, where yes, you have bigger organizations who have the capacity today, who give smaller organizations, particularly at the indigenous people and community level, the power to grow so that they themselves can replace that parent institution one day and directly access financing. This is an important part of the quality agenda on finance. And the final thing we have to do is not forget the poorest people. Because when we talk about protecting the resource, when we talk about making sure people are around the table when we're doing planning, when we're talking about growing and diversifying businesses, there are always going to be marginalized communities who simply are never going to be able to sit at the table. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the time. They're never going to be able to commercialize their local resources. They're too far away, they're too isolated. So we have to make sure that we safeguard the safety net of those poorest people. Whether it's through things like payment for environmental services, conditional cash transfers, we have to make sure that we never forget there are going to be communities who, through no fault of their own, are never going to be able to take part in the green, resilient, and inclusive economy in the way other communities will. But we need to make sure they're safeguarded. And if we take these four paths, planning, protecting the resource, growing and diversifying businesses, and safeguarding safety net for the poorest and most marginalized, then we can move away, Faris, from financing green projects into really creating and financing and building green economies.
Thank you very much, Valerie. That was very, very well said and very structured. Okay, I think this is a natural transition because you talked about protection. I see all of you had elements of that. Martin, of course, talked about incentives and public goods, and John spoke about also scale and others, which leads us to a question to you, Louise. And that's based on international experience. You know that throughout the world, one of the key success factors, if we see this happening, at least certainly happening right, is, you know, if we have put in place a resilient rural livelihoods situation, we have to make sure that indigenous and people and local communities have genuine voice in the whole process, and they feel a sense of ownership, particularly in terms of the development and implementation of development programs. What are the elements you think, and you know a little bit about Nepal as well, we've talked in the past, what are the key elements that you want us to take with us on this?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to echo everyone else on the wow. I mean, in a moment in time when we're looking at so many sad, depressing stories, when I was preparing for this panel and reading about the progress made in Nepal in terms of reversing deforestation, I mean, just 44% now from 26% not that long ago. That to me is a huge success story that really gave me hope. I mean, yes, I heard you mentioned there are challenges. We can't be too rosy-eyed. And I want to pick up on, you know, John says, how do you go from scale? And Valerie gave us some very good pointers. But I want to talk about how do you make it sustainable, because it's intimately linked to the question that you asked about inclusion. How do you ensure that these gains stay around and last, and that the structures don't get eroded and the social fabric weakened by tensions? And that could reverse all the progress made in some of the countries we've discussed. So what we saw before 93 was, despite the fact that everybody knew there was a lot of economic value in the forests and that they certainly had a lot of environmental value, that was not a doubt, they were being deforested and depleted and poorly managed and losing ground, so to speak, in a very real sense. So the question is, what changed and what did we need in addition to change that? Because we already had the emphasis on the environment and the economic growth, I would argue, with no lack of modesty, Valerie, that one would need social sustainability. One would need to look at making people feel that they're part of the forest and that they and their descendants will benefit if those forests are well managed. And that will change, the attitude from getting out the most that I can get from managing this as a collective where we're all part of it. So social sustainability, I don't know what the magic number is, but Valerie and I each have 4. So social sustainability first is about inclusion. And it is what we heard, a focus on the indigenous communities, on the Dalit, on the women. It's expanding an integrated approach, water, agriculture. We heard about financial services. Inclusion is access to markets and services for all. And I think what we saw was an effort to expand that, perhaps in a project-by-project way. Perhaps it does need to be scaled up, but there was a real emphasis on that. Second was what we call process legitimacy. It's making people feel that decisions they make are real and going to benefit them. If they can't take wood out of the forest because that could overburden it and deforest, that they agree with that decision. They were part of that decision. They were managing it collectively, and that it was a legitimately made decision. How did that happen, and how can that happen across the world? Well, one, clear benefit sharing plans that are built in a participatory way that not only affects those who immediately go into the forest every day or go down to fish, but the entire community that needs to be involved in understanding the benefit sharing. That there was this collective approach between the rangers and the communities we heard about to develop participatory plans where everybody was involved, where the policy arena, where decisions are made at the local level and at the national level, are open to the Dalit, to the women, to the indigenous community, where everyone goes to parliament and has a chance, not everyone, but where everyone has an opportunity to see someone who represents their interests sit in parliament and influence the policy arena there. Hugely, hugely important in ensuring the sustainability. That you share information, that it's evidence-based. We heard about forest inventories. We heard about local development plans. Those need to be shared with CSOs, with local governments, with the ministries that are involved. Third is building trust and building social cohesion. Now, what we call social cohesion, trust within communities that everyone, that the women, the Dalit, the indigenous people who you rely on those forests can trust one another, trust across communities, and trust with local government and beyond. We have seen, well, I'll mention what trust does in a moment, but what led to trust, what can create trust is getting different groups to come together around that participatory plan, getting groups who tend not to work together, to sit together to work on the forestry management. A programmatic approach, not having it be a one-off project. Trust is eroded when the project's here today, gone tomorrow. When it's long-term and there's a commitment to it. When CSOs and different actors are involved, that also helps to build trust. And then finally, resilience. And we talked a lot about resilience. By the way, 90% of the bank's PADs mention resilience. Project documents. This is a huge objective in the bank. Even I was surprised to see more than inclusion, which is 50% of the bank's project documents. But what we need is community resilience. We need household resilience, community resilience, systems resilience. And what we've seen from COVID and what we've seen from disasters such as Aceh in Indonesia, what we've seen from social tensions in the Middle East and North Africa, is that you're much better at managing challenges like drought, like flooding, like climate, like access to quality education for your community when there's trust. It makes sense when you're willing to work together. So building trust is a key dimension we've seen of building resilience across communities. So I think from what I've seen, and I have to admit, much to my chagrin, I've never been to Nepal, so I can't speak with the certainty of my colleagues on this panel. Yes, I at some point I must fix that. It's always been a dream to go. I'm a hiker, so I mean, in addition to wanting to protect the forests and see the amazing work that's been done. It's a model for the emissions reductions programs in Nepal that are being scaled up, as you know, through Enable, through Scale. It's a model for those programs in other parts of the country. And the model that has worked for community forestry, I hope can also be in adaptation more writ large in Nepal. I had the opportunity to meet with Bamal when I was at the COP 27. He was a panelist in our session on community-led adaptation and really had a whole plan that's been developed that builds on many of these principles that we've seen for the forests to take them to other parts and to apply it nationwide in the country, which builds very much on your federalism system. So let me just say, yes, of course, there are challenges, and I don't know enough to say, but I think we've got to applaud and acknowledge the progress made, the opportunities to scale up, and hopefully the sustainability of these gains. We talk a lot about GRID, Green, Inclusive, Resilient Development, but I think we need to expand that eye to understand what underpins it. And for me, I would say some of these 4 dimensions of social sustainability are key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. And colleagues, notice how masterfully Louise managed to get herself a trip to Nepal as part of our discussion. And most welcome. You'd be most welcome. Now, let me turn to our colleague and, of course, our client and those who are tasked with leading or creating the ecosystem for this to happen, Joint Secretary Sri Krishna Nepal. I was referring to, as you know, the new Nepal, the new federal structure of Nepal, which was a unitary government, now is 7 provinces and 753 municipalities. And we are clearly talking, we all agree on, this is the model, the aspiration of the Nepali people is a cooperative federalism. How do you see that cooperative federalism and shaping up and supporting integrated landscape development at the 3 levels? Do you see it happening? What are the challenges? And what is the role that you in Ministry of Finance and the respected secretary can play to make that happen? Over.
Thank you very much, Ferris. Actually, in the federal system, first, I think risk, maybe the challenges we talk about is coordination, It would be either policy coordination, strategic coordination, programming and budget coordination, allocation, many things like there could be the risk of duplication, and then maybe the waste of the resources. So first. And secondly, the building trust, cascading the federal policies, development goals, and also the country development priorities up to the local levels. So, and thirdly, like I would emphasize on the implementation arrangement. Actually, like the planning, programming, and budgeting. Using the underlying intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms, to incentivize the good practices. For example, the GRID, for example, if you would have strategy and action plan finalized and get it implemented, then it has to be owned largely by all tiers of the governments, not only simply from the federal governments. As I was presenting earlier, like you see, there is a huge funding gap. And then not simply like government resources would be sufficient enough to finance for the activities. So to incentivize, to bring in all tiers of the government and to work together to deliver the same results with the GRID approach. Like it would be inclusive, it would be resilient, it would be community owned, it would be local indigenous sort of ideas to be exposed enough and to be rolled out. And then those success stories, good cases, good practices could be also be incorporated throughout the government. So I would basically see the role of Ministry of Finance to bring every sectors and governments through the policies, the sector policies, the strategies, planning, programming, budgeting, and underlying intergovernmental coordination mechanisms in particular. We do have those mechanisms in place that can be activated, and could be better participatory approach could be followed, and then everyone's share, everyone's contributions could be reflected. That could be the way I think to move forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joint Secretary. Colleagues, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We had planned two questions each, but the conversation was so rich that I apologize. We will not be able to do it. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, but you've more than compensated with the richness of the discussion and the answers. I won't be. I'm not that much of a narcissist to try to encapsulate everything you've said, and I won't do justice to it. But if I can say it in my usual simpleton way, I've written down some notes here. There's no magic bullet. I think that's what Martin said, but the others have said, but there is magic, and we're seeing the magic happening in Nepal. I think the wow factor, as John said, is right. The trick is how to scale it using incentives, using financial systems, using other policies to create an ecosystem to scale it up, and looking at incentives. There's an element, and this is something that I usually draw some weird looks at when I say that sometimes public goods can remain public even if you privatize them. And we have to find that, and I think this is an important case where, addressing private incentives can actually support the public good. I think Valerie really resonated with me when she said we don't need to really reinvent the wheel, and we have to we're not bringing solutions to Nepal, we're trying to understand the massively rich solutions that Nepal in and of itself has autonomously and autochthonally developed, and we need to help them with planning that and sort of scaling that up, and help set the boundaries for it to be grown. And I think the issue of scale, growing and diversification of assets is really, really important. When we turn to Lou saying that clearly we want to do all of this, but in order to make it sustainable, we have to ensure that there's voice. And we have to ensure that ultimately, because, World Bank projects have a lifespan. Ministry of Finance policies have a lifespan, but intergenerational sort of ownership of the land and the assets of the land is infinite. So we have to rely on that. And I think inclusion and voice is really important. All of this can be grounded in the fiscal system, and they have a new fiscal system in Nepal, which is led by, anyway, I won't go into the details, which is appropriately called National Natural Resource and Fiscal Commission. So I love that word, natural resource. And I think within that, looking at the calculus of that will help create and federalize what the ambition is here. So with that, I want to thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for educating me. And I'll maybe introduce our respected secretary, Toyam Rai, to come and close us out, please. Should we, yeah, I think we'll go down. Yeah. You've earned your seat.
Yeah. Got my water.
Thank you so much. Good session.
Ambassador of Nepal to USA, Mr. Sridhar Khatri, Executive Directors from World Bank, World Bank Country Director, Mr. Faris, Senior Official from the Government of Nepal and the World Bank, distinguished panelists and participants, good afternoon and namaste. It is my great pleasure to join this afternoon with you just before returning back home from the spring meeting engagement. I would like to thank World Bank for the event with the theme of evolving the bank's revelations roadmap, operationalizing Nepal's vision for grid in forest landscape. Let me recall that the past efforts on Nepal's plan development have helped realize significant progress in the social sector, while mixed results are evident in the economic, infrastructure, and other sectors. The percentage of people living under absolute poverty has substantially declined. Further, we have a long-term vision of 2030, sustainable development goals, and graduation strategy to achieve in a systematic manner. However, climate change is a serious global concern and existential threat to human civilization. It has adversely affected agriculture, food, water resources, forests, biodiversity, human health, tourism, energy, irrigation, settlements, and infrastructure. Poor mainstreaming of the climate change issue in the overall development process, lack of overall institutional capacity, necessary finance, technology, and knowledge to address climate change are some of the challenges Nepal facing. In close coordination with World Bank, Nepal endorsed the landmark Kathmandu Declaration to a greener, more resilient, and more inclusive development pathway. Nepal is taking ambitious, concrete steps to recalibrate its economy as part of green, resilience, and inclusive development grid approach. Environment-friendly development process with low carbon emission adopted under renewable clean energy programs have contributed to the reduction of emissions while forest sectors programs are in operation. Now it is time to build on Nepal's successes and enhance and scale up ongoing success like community-based forestry to pursue productive livelihoods as well as conservation. Similarly, we have to work on investing on build climate resilience, ameliorated the risks of the floods, drought, and heat stress on people and their population landscapes, and support sustainable infrastructure, including hydropower, road, water, and irrigation, among others. We need a investment to meet the development target with grid approach. Concessional climate finance is not enough to meet the demand. We have to work even in more collaborative way with development partners while attracting foreign direct investment with timely policy changes. Thank you all of this opportunity to join these events and be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your remarks. We have now come to the end of this event. We invite you to join us for a reception outside. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. I know they have. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for everything.